Cruelty was a currency in Larkin Steves's world, and he spent it freely. So, when he invited his aggressively mousy secretary to the bloodiest, most high-stakes gala of the underground year, it was supposed to be a punchline, a bet, a way to watch the invisible girl stutter and break. He expected a poorly fitted cardigan and a panic attack. Instead, she walked through those brass doors looking like a war he was destined to lose, and the punchline died in his throat. Part 1. The architecture of a joke. The Steve Syndicate did not operate out of a smoke-filled back room. They operated out of the 42nd floor of a glass and steel monolith in the financial district. The floors were polished Italian marble. The coffee was imported from a small, terrified farm in Colombia. And the violence was scrubbed clean, sterilized into spreadsheets and quarterly earnings reports. Penelope Woods managed the spreadsheets. She was a master of the mundane, a woman who had weaponized her own invisibility. At 28, Penelope possessed the kind of aggressive averageness that made people look right through her. She wore slacks the color of wet cement. Her blouses were invariably high-necked and purchased from department stores that smelled of lavender and defeat. Her hair, a non-committal shade of ash brown, was always scraped back into a severe clip that gave her a perpetual minor headache. She liked the headache. It kept her grounded. It kept her awake. She knew exactly who she worked for. You didn't process invoices for bulk purchases of industrial lye and plastic sheeting without putting the pieces together. But the medical benefits were extraordinary. Her 401k was matched at 7%, and the mob, as it turned out, took workplace harassment very seriously. Someone had whistled at her in the break room during her second week. That man was subsequently transferred to the waste management division and never seen again. Penelope survived by being furniture. She was the desk lamp. She was the stapler. She handed Larkin Steves his black coffee at precisely 8:15 every morning, ignored the occasional speck of dried rust on his expensive cuffs, and retreated to her cubicle to balance ledgers that routinely hid extortion. Larkin Steves was a man composed entirely of sharp edges. He had inherited the syndicate from his father 3 years ago, taking a brutal, messy organization and turning it into a corporate machine. He was young, 32, with dark hair cut ruthlessly short and eyes the color of a winter ocean. He did not smile. He calculated. And lately, he was profoundly bored. Boredom in a man like Larkin was dangerous. It manifested as a twitch in his jaw, a tendency to linger too long on the microscopic flaws of his subordinates. "She's a robot, Larkin. I'm telling you, cut her open and wires fall out." Thomas Dixon, Larkin's cousin and underboss, leaned against the heavy oak of Larkin's desk, swirling amber liquid in a crystal glass. Thomas was everything Larkin wasn't: loud, reckless, and deeply amused by his own cruelty. Larkin didn't look up from his tablet. "She's efficient." "She's a ghost in orthopedic shoes," Thomas corrected, taking a slow sip. He glanced through the glass wall of the office to where Penelope sat at her desk, aggressively typing, her posture terrible. "I bet she's never even had a drink. I bet she sleeps in a filing cabinet. I've never seen her react to anything. Jimmy got shot in the lobby last month. She just stepped over the blood and asked if the elevators were still running." "She had a quarterly tax filing due that morning," Larkin murmured, his tone devoid of inflection. "Come on, Larkin. Where's your sense of humor?" Thomas pushed off the desk, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. "The Solstice Gala is Friday, Every heavy hitter from the 5 families is going to be there. Bring her." Larkin finally stopped scrolling. He looked up, his pale eyes pinning his cousin. "Bring my secretary to the Solstice Gala." "Yes." Thomas grinned, showing teeth. "Tell her it's a mandatory corporate function. Tell her to dress nice. Watch her show up in a tweed skirt suit and sensible flats. The Don of the Steves family, walking in with a librarian. The looks on their faces alone will be worth it. And watching her try to hold a conversation with Victor from the Bratva, she'll probably try to offer him a spreadsheet. It's a flawless joke." Larkin looked back through the glass. Penelope was squinting at her monitor, chewing absent-mindedly on the end of a cheap plastic pen. She looked utterly out of place in the sleek, predatory environment of the 42nd floor. She looked soft, dull, entirely breakable. A cruel, idle flicker of amusement sparked in Larkin's chest. It was a terrible idea. It was petty. It was beneath him. "If she cries," Larkin said, his voice quiet, "you're cleaning up the mess." "Deal," Thomas laughed. 10 minutes later, Larkin opened the glass door. The ambient hum of the floor died down instantly, as it always did when he emerged. He walked to Penelope's desk. She didn't look up until he tapped a knuckle against the laminate surface. "Mr. Steves," she said, her voice flat, professional. "The offshore accounts have been reconciled." The discrepancy was a rounding error in the Cayman branch. "Good," Larkin said. He studied her face. No makeup, a slight smudge of ink on her left cheekbone. Eyes the color of weak tea. "Clear your schedule for Friday evening." Penelope blinked. "Friday evening? After 6? 8 o'clock. Is there an emergency audit?" She reached for her planner, a battered, color-coded monstrosity. "It's a dinner," Larkin said, watching her carefully for a reaction. "The Solstice Gala, the Continental Hotel, it's mandatory for senior staff." A lie. Penelope wasn't senior staff. She was an admin. Her hand hovered over her planner. She looked up at him. For a fraction of a second, Larkin saw something sharp flash in those dull brown eyes. Something that looked startlingly like comprehension. But then it was gone, buried under a lifetime of practiced compliance. "I see," she said. "Wear something nice," Larkin added, the words feeling surprisingly heavy on his tongue. "It's a formal event." "Of course, Mr. Steves," she replied, her tone perfectly even. "Will you require me to bring the Q3 projection files, or is this strictly a networking event?" "Just bring yourself, Miss Woods." He turned and walked away, feeling a sudden, inexplicable twist of guilt in his gut. He pushed it down. It was just a dinner, a harmless bit of sport, the lions playing with the mouse before the slaughter. Part 2. The armor. Penelope did not cry when she got home. She locked the deadbolt of her cramped 4th-floor walk-up, kicked off her sensible shoes, and stared at the peeling paint on her ceiling. She wasn't stupid. You don't survive 3 years in the epicenter of an organized crime syndicate by being oblivious. She knew exactly what the Solstice Gala was. She managed the catering budget for it. She knew the guest list. It was a viper's nest of murderers, extortionists, and sociopaths in bespoke suits. And she knew why Larkin Steves had invited her. She had seen Thomas Dixon looking at her through the glass. She had seen the smirks. They thought she was a punchline. The invisible, pathetic secretary, dragged into the glittering, blood-soaked light of their world, just so they could watch her squirm. They wanted to see her shrink. They wanted to laugh into their champagne flutes as she stood in a corner, clutching a cheap purse, drowning in her own inadequacy. Penelope walked into her tiny bathroom and looked at herself in the harsh fluorescent light. She looked tired. She looked exactly like a woman drowning in $90,000 of student loan debt, working a job that routinely threatened her immortal soul just to keep the lights on. She looked like a target. "Not this time," she whispered to the mirror. She was exhausted from shrinking. She was so incredibly tired of folding herself into tiny, unnoticeable squares so that loud, dangerous men wouldn't look at her twice. They wanted a joke? Fine. But Penelope was the one who balanced their books. She knew the margins. She knew how to calculate a return on investment. She walked over to her laptop, opened it, and logged into her savings account. $6,000. Her emergency fund. 6 months of safety if the syndicate ever went under, or she got caught in a crossfire. She transferred $5,000 to her checking account. The next evening, after work, Penelope did not go back to her walk-up. She took a cab to Fifth Avenue. She walked into a boutique that had a security guard at the door and no price tags on the clothes. The saleswoman, a severe woman with architectural hair, took one look at Penelope's gray slacks and opened her mouth, likely to direct her to a department store down the street. "I need a dress," Penelope said, cutting her off. Her voice lacked its usual office timidity. It was flat, hard, and entirely uncompromising. "I have a budget of $4,000. It needs to be floor length. It needs to be black. And it needs to look like it could cut a man's throat." The saleswoman paused. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. "Right this way." The transformation was not a fairy tale. There were no singing birds, no magical pumpkins. It was a cold, calculated assembling of armor. The dress they found was a masterpiece of structural engineering and dark silk. It didn't sparkle, it absorbed light. It was backless, dipping dangerously low, suspended by delicate chains of gunmetal rather than straps. The front was a severe, elegant cowl that draped over her collarbones, sophisticated but unforgiving. It fit her like a second layer of skin, revealing curves she had spent the last decade aggressively hiding beneath wool and polyester. She bought shoes that were less footwear and more weapons, stiletto heels tipped in actual steel. She bought a clutch that looked like a jagged piece of obsidian. By Friday afternoon, she had taken a half day. She sat in a salon chair and let a stranger wash the grayness out of her life. "What are we doing?" the stylist asked, running hands through Penelope's mousy hair. "I want it dark," Penelope said. "Espresso, and cut it. A bob, sharp." She watched pieces of her camouflage fall to the floor. The ash brown gave way to a rich, glossy darkness that made her pale skin look luminous rather than sickly. The blunt cut framed her jawline, highlighting bone structure she had forgotten she possessed. When it came time for makeup, she didn't ask for natural. She didn't ask for pretty. She asked for war, a deep blood-red lip, eyes lined in heavy, smoked-out coal. When she finally stood up and looked in the full-length mirror, her breath caught in her throat. The woman staring back at her was a stranger. She was dangerous. She looked like the kind of woman who didn't keep the books for the Mafia, but the kind of woman who owned them. She slipped the heavy, cold chains of the dress over her shoulders. She stepped into the steel-tipped shoes. She grabbed the obsidian clutch. She didn't feel like a secretary. She felt like a loaded gun. "Let's go hear the punchline," she murmured to the empty room. Part 3. The Shift. The Continental Hotel ballroom smelled of orchids, expensive bourbon, and barely concealed malice. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the sea of custom tuxedos and designer gowns. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner, trying their best to ignore the fact that at least half the men in the room were actively plotting to murder the other half. Larkin stood near the central bar, a glass of scotch loose in his grip. He was in his element, nodding to underbosses, accepting the terrified, respectful greetings of minor associates. Yet, there was a tight coil of tension at the base of his neck. He kept glancing at his watch. 8:15. She was late. Penelope Woods was never late. In 3 years, she had never been a minute past 8 in the morning. "She bailed," Thomas said, appearing at Larkin's elbow, looking smug. He plucked a piece of lint off his velvet lapel. "I told you. She probably got to the lobby, saw a guy with a gun bulge, and ran crying back to her cats." "She doesn't have cats," Larkin said mechanically. "Whatever. The point is, your little pet ghost couldn't handle the pressure. Honestly, it's for the best. Having her stand around looking like a substitute teacher would have killed the vibe." Larkin didn't answer. He stared at the amber liquid in his glass. He felt a heavy, ugly sensation settling in his stomach. It wasn't disappointment, it was shame. He had bullied a civilian. He had used his power to humiliate a woman who did nothing but keep his empire organized. It was a sloppy, arrogant move. It made him feel entirely too much like his father. "I'm going to get another drink," Larkin muttered, turning away from Thomas. "Suit yourself," Thomas laughed. "I'm going to go find the Bratva guys, see if they want to bet on how long it takes you to fire her on Monday." Larkin took a step toward the bartender, and then the room changed. It wasn't a sudden silence. It was a physical shift in the atmosphere, like the drop in barometric pressure right before a violent storm. The low hum of conversation faltered. The string quartet missed a beat, the cellist's bow scraping harshly against the strings before recovering. Heads began to turn, one by one, toward the grand brass doors at the entrance of the ballroom. Larkin stopped. The hairs on his arms stood up. It was a predator's instinct. The collective attention of 100 dangerous men had just zeroed in on a single point in space. He turned slowly, expecting to see a rival boss, or perhaps a police raid. He saw her. For 3 full seconds, Larkin Steves' brain completely failed to process the visual information being sent to it. She was standing at the top of the short staircase that led down into the ballroom. The light from the chandeliers caught the gunmetal chains biting into her bare, porcelain shoulders. The black silk draped over her body like liquid night, clinging to a waist he never knew she had. Pooling around the steel-tipped heels that struck the marble steps with the rhythmic, terrifying cadence of a metronome. Her dark hair was a sharp, glossy helmet that framed a face carved out of ice. Her lips were a slash of violence red. Men were staring, men who routinely dealt in human currency, men who bought and sold beauty like it was copper wire, were completely immobilized. She didn't look pretty. She looked ruinous. Thomas, standing 10 feet away, dropped his champagne flute. It shattered on the marble floor. Larkin couldn't breathe. His lungs felt tightly banded in iron. Every drop of blood in his body seemed to rush instantly to his head, leaving his extremities cold and numb. This was Penelope, the woman who brought him coffee, The woman who asked questions about the deductible on the company dental plan. She reached the bottom of the stairs. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look down at her feet. She looked straight across the room, her dark, heavily lined eyes sweeping the crowd with absolute disdain until they locked onto Larkin. He felt the impact of that stare in his teeth. She began to walk toward him. The crowd parted. They actually parted. Hardened killers stepped aside, offering her a wide berth, sensing instinctively that she was not prey. Larkin's grip on his Scotch glass tightened until his knuckles were white. He couldn't move. He felt rooted to the floor. The cruel joke he and Thomas had constructed was rapidly dissolving, replaced by a terrifying, electric reality. She stopped 3 feet in front of him, close enough that he could smell her. She didn't smell like department store lavender. She smelled like ozone, like a struck match. "Mr. Steeves," Penelope said. Her voice was the same, calm, even, precise, but framed by the red lips and the harsh light. It sounded like a threat. Larkin opened his mouth. His mind, usually a steel trap of tactics and rhetoric, was entirely blank. "You're late," he managed to say. It was a stupid, weak thing to say, and he hated himself the second the words left his mouth. Penelope did not flinch. She tilted her chin up slightly, her dark eyes pinning him to the wall behind him. "You didn't specify a time, Mr. Steeves," she replied smoothly. She glanced around the room, taking in the staring faces, the paralyzed crowd, and then looked back at him. A slow, terrifyingly cold smile curved the edges of her red lips. "I assumed you wanted me to make an entrance. Does this meet corporate requirements?" Larkin stared at her. The air between them felt thick, charged with a sudden, violent gravity. He had invited a mouse to a slaughterhouse to watch it die. He realized, with a cold spike of adrenaline, that he had accidentally invited a wolf. "It exceeds them," Larkin murmured, his voice dropping an octave, completely outside of his own control. "Excellent," Penelope said. She shifted her weight, the silk slipping smoothly over her hip. "Now, which one of these gentlemen is the contact for the Cayman accounts? I have some questions about their recent overhead expenses." She wasn't here to survive the joke. She was here to own the punchline. Larkin looked at this woman, this stranger who had been hiding in plain sight in his office for 3 years, and for the first time in a decade, the dawn of the Steeves family felt genuine, unadulterated fear. And right behind it, a desperate, consuming hunger. Part 4. The Audit. Larkin did not know what to do with his hands. For a man who regularly ordered the dismantling of rival organizations before his morning espresso, the sudden loss of basic motor function was alarming. He finally shoved his hands into his trouser pockets, a tight, defensive posture, as he fell into step beside Penelope. She did not wait for him to lead. She cut through the ballroom like a knife through soft tissue. The men who had mocked her existence hours earlier now pressed themselves against the high-top tables to let her pass. They stared at the severe line of her bob, the pale expanse of her back, and the jagged, expensive clutch she held like a brick. "Langdon," Penelope said quietly, not looking at Larkin as they walked. "Arthur Langdon. He handles the routing through the Grand Cayman shell companies, correct?" "Yes," Larkin said. His voice sounded thin to his own ears. He cleared his throat. "He's standing by the ice sculpture, gray suit, sweating." "He should be," Penelope murmured. Arthur Langdon was a nervous, damp man who skimmed a negligible fraction off the top of the syndicate's laundered funds. It was an amount so small Larkin hadn't bothered to kill him for it yet. Finding a reliable offshore banker was tedious, and a little theft was the cost of doing business. Langdon watched them approach. His eyes darted from Larkin's dark, unreadable expression to the terrifying woman walking in sync with him. He gripped his martini glass with white knuckles. "Arthur," Larkin said, his tone flat. "Mr. Steeves," Langdon squeaked. He looked at Penelope. He tried to swallow, but his throat appeared to have seized. "And, your guest." "Penelope Woods," she introduced herself. She did not extend her hand. She merely stopped 2 feet in front of him, letting the silence stretch until it became a physical weight. "A pleasure, Miss Woods," Langdon lied. "Mr. Langdon," Penelope began, her voice the auditory equivalent of a scalpel. "I was reviewing the Q3 routing protocols. Specifically, the transfer delays between the shell entity in Nassau and the primary holding account in Georgetown. There seems to be a consistent 48-hour lag. A lag that, given the current interest rates on short-term overnight holds, generates a rather specific yield." Langdon stopped breathing. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin the color of old oatmeal. Larkin watched him. Then, slowly, he turned his head to look at his secretary. I don't know what you mean," Langdon stammered, looking pleadingly at Larkin. "International transfers take time. Bank compliance is automated," Penelope cut in smoothly. "I ran the algorithms on the Swift network logs. The delay isn't systemic. It's manual. Someone is holding the funds in a high-yield intermediary account for exactly 2 days before passing the principal along to us. They are keeping the interest." She took a slow, calculated sip from a glass of sparkling water she had acquired from a passing tray. She let the silence hang, heavy and suffocating. "Over 3 years," Penelope continued, her dark eyes entirely devoid of mercy. "That stolen interest compounds. It amounts to roughly $412,000, give or take the exchange rate fluctuations." Langdon's martini glass slipped from his fingers. It hit the carpeted floor with a dull thud, the gin soaking into the expensive wool. Larkin felt a cold, sharp thrill race up his spine. He had known Langdon was skimming. He had estimated it at perhaps 50 grand a year. He hadn't realized the rat was stealing over 100,000, or exactly how he was doing it. "Larkin, I swear," Langdon choked out, taking a step backward. "She's making it up. Who is this? Some auditor?" "She's my secretary," Larkin said softly. A slow, dangerous smile finally broke across his face. It was the first time he had smiled all week. "And she balances my books." Thomas Dixon materialized from the crowd, a fresh champagne flute in hand, looking flushed and irritated by the sudden shift in the room's center of gravity. He barged into the circle, looking Penelope up and down with a mixture of hostility and blatant hunger. "What's going on here?" Thomas demanded. He aimed a sneer at Penelope. "Nice costume, Woods. Rent it by the hour?" It was a crude, stupid attempt to reassert dominance, to put her back in the box. Penelope didn't blink. She turned her head slowly to look at Thomas. "Mr. Dixon," she said, her voice dropping to a conversational murmur that somehow carried over the string quartet. "I noticed the catering budget for your sector's weekly meetings has increased by 40% this quarter. The invoices came. You are ordering imported Wagyu for 15 men every Tuesday. Yet, the meat supplier you use is owned by your brother-in-law. Thomas froze, his mouth half open. If you are going to embezzle from your own cousin, Penelope said, leaning in just a fraction of an inch, the scent of ozone and iron washing over him. I suggest you don't do it through a paper trail of steaks. It's uninspired, and it insults my intelligence when I have to file it. She turned back to a hyperventilating Arthur Langdon. Have the missing 412,000 wired to the primary operational account by Monday at 9 a.m., Mr. Langdon. Or Mr. Steves will stop delegating to me and he will start delegating to the men standing by the exits. She didn't wait for a response. She turned on her steel-tipped heel and walked toward the terrace doors. Larkin watched her go. He looked at Langdon, who was clutching his chest, and then at Thomas, who looked as though he had just been hit by a cement truck. Monday at 9, Larkin repeated to Langdon. He left his underboss and his corrupt banker drowning in their own panic, and he followed his secretary out into the cold. Part 5. The Reckoning. The air on the terrace was sharp, biting through the thin silk of Penelope's dress the moment she stepped outside. She walked to the heavy stone balustrade, gripping the cold granite with both hands. Below her, the city was a grid of gold and red light, moving and breathing in the dark. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her hands were shaking violently. She pressed her forehead against the cold stone, forcing herself to draw long, deliberate breaths. She had done it. She had dropped the match. But the adrenaline was receding now, leaving behind a cold, terrifying reality. She had just publicly humiliated an underboss and threatened a cartel banker. She had painted a massive neon target on her own back. The heavy glass door clicked open and shut. Heavy measured footsteps crossed the concrete. She didn't turn around. She knew the cadence of his walk. Larkin stopped beside her. He didn't speak immediately. He took a silver case from his inside pocket, extracted a cigarette, and lit it. The flare of the lighter illuminated his sharp profile, the heavy exhaustion around his eyes, the brutal set of his jaw. He snapped the lighter shut and exhaled a plume of gray smoke into the freezing air. "You're shaking," he said. His voice wasn't the flat, dead tone he used in the office. It was quiet, rough. "It's 30 degrees, Mr. Steves," she replied, keeping her gaze fixed on the traffic below. He shrugged off his suit jacket. It was a bespoke piece, heavy wool and silk lining. He stepped closer and draped it over her bare shoulders. The jacket was warm. It smelled of cedar, tobacco, and the violent, expensive world he inhabited. Penelope stiffened, but didn't pull away. She pulled the lapels tighter around her chest. 3 years, Larkin said, leaning his forearms on the balustrade, staring out at the skyline. "You've been sitting outside my door for 3 years, wearing gray wool, apologizing when the copier jammed, acting like a loud noise might kill you. A loud noise on the 42nd floor usually involves a hollow point bullet," Penelope pointed out dryly. "Flinching is a logical survival mechanism." Larkin turned his head to look at her. The harsh terrace lighting cast deep shadows under his cheekbones. "Why?" he asked. "Why hide? You have a mind like a steel trap. You just gutted Langdon in 60 seconds. You could have been running the entire accounting division. I would have paid you triple." Penelope finally turned to face him. The anger she had been suppressing for years flared up, burning away the residual fear. "You wouldn't have paid me triple," she said, her voice hard. "You would have noticed me." Larkin frowned, a slight crease forming between his brows. "Look at this room," Penelope said, gesturing blindly backward toward the glass doors of the ballroom. "Look at the men in there. Look at Thomas. Look at you. You run a machine built on violence, paranoia, and ego. Do you know what happens to women who stand out in this world? Women who show they are smart, or competent, or dangerous?" Larkin stayed silent, the ash on his cigarette burning down. "They become threats," Penelope answered her own question. "Or they become property. They get targeted by men like your cousin, who resent being outsmarted by someone they consider furniture. I have $90,000 in student loan debt, Mr. Steves. My mother is in a memory care facility that costs $6,000 a month. I needed the salary. I needed the medical benefits. I didn't need to prove a point." She stepped away from the balustrade, turning fully toward him. The oversized suit jacket swallowed her frame, but she looked 10 times larger than she ever had in her cubicle. "So, I wore the gray slacks," she continued, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and exhaustion. "I wore the clip in my hair. I scrubbed off my makeup and I stared at the floor, and I let Thomas call me a ghost because being invisible was the only way to stay safe in a building full of predators." Larkin felt a tight, painful knot form in his chest. It was a foreign sensation. It took him a long moment to identify it as shame. He had thought he was a good boss. He kept the violence out of the corporate offices. He paid well, but he had been entirely blind to the reality of the ecosystem he oversaw. He had let Thomas sneer, and worse, he had brought her here tonight as a joke. He had tried to strip away her armor just to alleviate his own boredom. "And tonight?" Larkin asked, his voice low. "Why drop the act tonight?" Penelope let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "Because you dragged me into the spotlight. I knew why you invited me. I heard Thomas. I knew the punchline." She took a step closer to him. She tilted her head back to meet his eyes, her gaze entirely unyielding. "If I had walked in there tonight in my cardigan," she said quietly, "you would have laughed. Thomas would have laughed. I would have remained a joke, but I would have been a humiliated joke. The invisibility wouldn't work anymore. You forced my hand. If I was going to be pushed into the snake pit, I was going to make sure the snakes knew I had teeth." Larkin stared down at her. The anger in her eyes was magnificent. It was raw, real, and entirely justified. She had played the game perfectly for 3 years, and he had broken the board on a whim. He dropped his cigarette onto the concrete and crushed it out with the heel of his Oxford shoe. "You made an enemy out of Thomas tonight," Larkin said, stating a logistical fact. "He is petty. He holds grudges. I am aware. Langdon will likely panic and try to run," Larkin added. "He'll be dealt with before Monday, but it leaves a gap in the offshore routing. I can reroute the Nassau accounts through a different shell in Belize," Penelope said instantly, without missing a beat. "It will reduce the transfer time to 12 hours and scrub the digital footprint cleaner than Langdon ever managed." Larkin let out a slow breath. A heavy silence settled between them, punctuated only by the distant wail of a police siren on the streets below. The dynamic between them had fractured irrevocably. The desk lamp had just plugged itself into the city's main power grid. "Monday morning," Larkin said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "You don't wear the gray slacks." Penelope tightened her grip on his jacket. "Are you firing me, Mr. Steves?" "No," Larkin said. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them until he could smell the ozone again. He looked down at the harsh red of her lips, the sharp intelligence in her eyes, and the terrifying, beautiful anger radiating from her skin. "I'm promoting you." He didn't wait for her to process it. He turned and walked back toward the glass doors of the ballroom, the cold air hitting him, bracing and sharp. He had a cartel banker to hunt down, an underboss to muzzle, and a new reality to build. The joke was over. Part 6. The corner office. Monday morning arrived with the gray, biting chill typical of November in the city. The 42nd floor hummed with its usual predatory efficiency. Keyboards clacked. Espresso machines hissed. Men in dark suits moved with the silent, hurried purpose of people who knew failure was not a fireable offense, but a fatal one. At precisely 8:15, the elevator doors chimed and slid open. Penelope Wood stepped onto the floor. She did not wear gray wool. She wore a tailored, charcoal pinstriped suit that hugged her shoulders and flared perfectly at the ankles. The cheap plastic clip was gone. Her dark hair fell in a sharp, blunt line that framed her jaw. She wore black leather pumps that echoed sharply against the Italian marble, devoid of steel tips, but carrying the exact same threat. Her lipstick was a muted, business-appropriate plum, but her eyes were lined in sharp, unforgiving black. The silence that rolled across the floor was not immediate. It was a wave. It started at the reception desk, where the administrative assistant actually stopped typing, her jaw going slack. It rippled through the bullpen. Conversations died mid-sentence. Eyes tracked Penelope's progress as she bypassed the admin cluster entirely. She walked toward the executive suites. Specifically, she walked toward the corner office adjacent to Larkin's, a space that had sat vacant since the former CFO was indicted and subsequently disappeared 3 years ago. The heavy glass door was open. Her name was already etched onto a brushed steel plaque mounted on the drywall. Penelope Woods, Director of Financial Operations. She stepped inside. The office was sprawling, walled in glass overlooking the harbor. A massive mahogany desk dominated the center. On it sat 2 curved monitors, a state-of-the-art encrypted phone line, and a single black coffee, still steaming. Penelope set her leather briefcase down. She looked at the coffee. She didn't have to ask who put it there. "I prefer it with a dash of oat milk now," she said to the empty room. Noted. Larkin stepped out from the adjoining private corridor that connected their offices. He wore a navy suit, no tie, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone. He looked rested, which was a lie. He hadn't slept since Friday. He had spent the weekend dismantling Arthur Langdon's life, seizing his assets, and ensuring the terrified banker was placed on a permanent, one-way flight to a country without an extradition treaty. Larkin leaned against the door frame, watching her. He was studying her with an intensity that made the hair on her arms stand up. "Is the desk satisfactory?" he asked. "It's loud," Penelope said, running a hand over the polished wood. "But it will hold the offshore ledgers." "Langdon is gone," Larkin said. He walked into the room, closing the distance between them. "The gap in the routing is open. We have 48 hours before the holding accounts in Nassau trigger an automatic audit from the Shell Board." "I told you on Friday," Penelope replied. pulling out her chair and sitting down. She booted up the monitors. "I can reroute through Belize. I just need authorization codes and your digital signature to bypass the secondary protocols." "You have them," Larkin said. He pulled a silver flash drive from his pocket and tossed it onto her desk. It clattered against the wood. "Everything is on there. You have full systemic control." Penelope looked at the drive. It was the digital key to the Steve Syndicate's entire treasury. Billions of dollars in laundered funds, extortion rackets, and legitimate real estate holdings. He was handing it to a woman who, 72 hours ago, he thought was an invisible secretary. "You're trusting me with the treasury," she said, her voice flat, masking a sudden spike of adrenaline. "I'm trusting you to be exactly who you showed me you were on Friday night," Larkin corrected. "A woman who understands the margins better than anyone else in this building." Before she could respond, the heavy glass door of her office swung open with enough force to crack the hinges. Thomas Dixon stormed in. His face was flushed a dark, violent red. He didn't look at Penelope. He marched straight toward Larkin. "What the hell is this?" Thomas demanded, gesturing wildly around the room. "She gets the corner office. She gets the director title. She's a glorified typist, Larkin. You're making a mockery of the chain of command." Larkin didn't move. He didn't blink. The shift in his demeanor was absolute. The quiet, intense man who had just handed over his financial empire vanished, replaced instantly by the Don. "Thomas," Larkin said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. "Lower your voice." Thomas ignored the warning. He turned his vitriol on Penelope, slamming his hands flat on her mahogany desk. "You think because you put on some makeup and played dress-up at a gala, you're suddenly a made man? You're a civilian. You don't know how this world works. The moment things get bloody, you're going to break." Penelope did not flinch. She slowly folded her hands over the silver flash drive. She looked up at Thomas, her expression completely devoid of emotion. "Mr. Dixon," Penelope said, "I am currently reviewing the discretionary funds for your enforcement operations in the garment district. You are operating at a 22% loss year over year. You are paying off inspectors who have already been indicted by the state, which means you are throwing Syndicate's funds into a black hole." Thomas's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "As of this morning," Penelope continued smoothly, "your discretionary budget is frozen. Every expenditure over $500 will require my direct, written approval. If you want to buy a box of bullets, you will submit an itemized receipt." Thomas turned slowly to Larkin, his eyes wide with outrage. "You're going to let her do this? She's cutting my legs out from under me. She is stopping you from bleeding my money," Larkin corrected. His eyes were dead, fixed on his cousin. "She is the director of finance. You answer to her on all monetary issues. If you speak to her with that tone again, you will find yourself managing the waste disposal routes in Staten Island. Are we clear?" The silence in the office was suffocating. Thomas stared at Larkin, realizing with a cold shock that his cousin was not bluffing. The hierarchy had shifted. The joke had become the judge. Thomas swallowed hard, his jaw tight. He shot one last venomous look at Penelope. "This is a mistake, Larkin." He turned and stalked out of the office, letting the glass door slam shut behind him. Penelope sat perfectly still until his heavy footsteps faded down the hall. Slowly, she exhaled, her shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch. "He's going to retaliate," she said quietly. "Let him try," Larkin said. He walked over to her desk, leaning down slightly so he was at her eye level. The scent of cedar and cold air washed over her. "You handle the math, Penelope. I handle the monsters." He turned and walked back into his private corridor. Penelope watched the empty doorway for a long moment. Then, she picked up the silver flash drive, plugged it into the terminal, and began to move millions. Part 7. The Belize Snag. 3 weeks passed. The transition was brutal, exhausting, and entirely seamless. Penelope reorganized the syndicate's financial architecture with the ruthlessness of a surgeon excising a tumor. She cut off dead weight. She streamlined the extortion payouts. She terrified the operational captains simply by emailing them spreadsheets with their inefficiencies highlighted in glaring red. They quickly learned that a summons to her corner office was far worse than a physical beating. You could heal from a broken jaw. You couldn't heal from Penelope Woods auditing your life. She worked 15-hour days. Larkin matched her. They existed in a state of high-functioning, heavily caffeinated isolation in their adjoining offices. The glass wall between them had been frosted over for security, but the private corridor remained open. They passed each other files, shared cold takeout dinners at midnight, and spoke in a shorthand language of risk assessment and asset reallocation. It was professional, it was necessary, and the tension between them was becoming unbearable. Every time Larkin handed her a document, his fingers lingered a second too long against hers. Every time Penelope looked up from her screens, she found him standing in the doorway, watching her with a dark, heavy hunger he was barely bothering to conceal. The dynamic had shifted from predator and prey to two apex predators circling the same cage, neither entirely sure who was supposed to strike first. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday night at 1 in the morning. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Penelope's office, distorting the city lights into angry, bleeding streaks of neon. The floor was entirely empty, plunged into darkness save for the pools of light radiating from her desk lamps. Penelope was staring at a line of code on her primary monitor, rubbing her temples. A dull, pulsing headache had settled behind her eyes around 8 o'clock and refused to leave. "It bounced again," she muttered. Larkin appeared in the doorway, holding 2 glasses of scotch. He walked in, setting one down near her keyboard. "The Belize route?" "Yes." Penelope picked up the heavy crystal glass, taking a grateful sip. The burn grounded her. "The secondary shell company is rejecting the transfer protocols. It's not an automated flag. Someone on the receiving end is manually blocking the deposit." Larkin frowned, dragging a chair over and sitting beside her. He leaned in, his shoulder brushing against hers. He felt entirely too solid, too warm in the cold, cavernous office. "Who controls the receiving node?" he asked, looking at the screen. "Javier Mendez," Penelope said, pulling up a dossier on her second monitor. "Cartel liaison. He handles the regional distribution for the southern seaboard. Langdon used to deal with him directly." "Mendez is a paranoid sociopath," Larkin noted, his voice flat. "If he's blocking the transfer, he suspects a trap. He knows Langdon is gone. He doesn't trust the new signature." "He wants a face-to-face," Penelope said, pointing to a secure message thread at the bottom of the screen. "He sent an encrypted ping an hour ago. He wants to meet the new director. Tomorrow night, Miami." Larkin's posture changed instantly. The casual proximity vanished, replaced by a rigid, coiled tension. "No," It's not a request, Larkin. The funds are in purgatory. If they sit there for another 48 hours, the federal algorithms will flag the volume. We lose $12 million. I said no, Larkin repeated, standing up abruptly. He paced away from the desk, running a hand through his dark hair. I'll go. I'll take a crew down to Miami, sit down with Mendez, and force him to authorize the receiving codes. Penelope swiveled her chair to face him. You can't. Mendez doesn't want the muscle. He wants the architect. He needs to know that the person pushing the buttons isn't a federal agent who seized Langdon's laptop. If you show up with a crew, he'll burn the accounts and disappear. He is a cartel enforcer, Penelope, Larkin snapped, turning back to her, his eyes blazing. He flays people alive for skimming. You are not going to a sit-down with him. I am the director of finance. She shot back, her voice rising, matching his volume. She stood up, the exhaustion replaced by a sudden, fierce surge of adrenaline. This is my route. This is my math. You put me in this chair to fix the machine. Let me fix it. You fix the numbers in here, Larkin said, stepping into her space, closing the distance until they were inches apart. He was glaring down at her, his jaw locked. You don't go into the field. You don't sit in a room with men who view human life as a rounding error. Penelope stared up at him. She didn't back down. The air between them was electric, thick with anger and something far more dangerous. Men like you? She asked softly. Larkin stopped. The words hit him like a physical blow. He stared at her, the anger in his eyes fracturing, revealing the raw, desperate panic hiding beneath it. He didn't want her safe because she was a valuable asset. He wanted her safe because the thought of Javier Mendez, even looking at her, made his blood run cold. I am not letting you walk into a cartel safe house, Larkin said, his voice dropping to a rough, ragged whisper. Then walk in with me, Penelope replied. Her voice was steady, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. She didn't step back. You don't bring the crew. You don't bring Thomas. You bring me. You are the Don. I am your proxy. We show him a united front. Mendez respects power. If he sees you backing my play, he'll release the hold. Larkin looked at her. He looked at the harsh, uncompromising set of her jaw, the dark fire in her eyes. She wasn't the mousy secretary anymore, and she wasn't just a corporate shark. She was his equal. She understood the violence, the risk, and she was willing to step into the blood to protect their empire. He reached out, his hand wrapping around her upper arm. His grip was tight, possessive. If anything goes wrong, Larkin said, his thumb brushing against the silk of her blouse, his eyes locked onto hers. If he even breathes in your direction the wrong way, the math doesn't matter anymore. I'll burn his entire operation to ash. Penelope felt a shiver run down her spine that had absolutely nothing to do with the cold rain beating against the glass. Understood, she murmured. Pack a bag, Larkin said, finally stepping back, though his eyes never left hers. Wheels up at dawn. Part 8. The Miami Sit-Down. Miami did not care about the cold logic of New York. It was a city built on oppressive heat, blinding white sunlight, and a humidity that felt like a physical weight on the chest. Javier Mendez chose a private, glass-walled conference room in a high-rise overlooking Biscayne Bay for the meeting. The air conditioning was cranked so high, the room felt like a meat locker, a stark contrast to the blazing sun outside. It was an interrogation tactic. Mendez liked his guests uncomfortable. He sat at the head of a long marble table, flanked by two men who wore expensive linen suits that bulged slightly at the waistbands. Mendez himself was in his late 40s, impeccably groomed, with a heavy gold watch catching the harsh overhead light. He did not stand when Larkin and Penelope walked in. Larkin wore a lightweight charcoal suit, his expression a mask of absolute, violent indifference. He pulled out a chair for Penelope, waited for her to sit, and then took the seat beside her, completely ignoring the armed guards. Mendez leaned forward, resting his elbows on the marble. He looked at Larkin first, offering a slow, calculated nod. Then, his dark, dead eyes slid to Penelope. She wore a bone-white suit, sharp and unyielding. She had tied her dark hair back into a low, severe knot at the nape of her neck. She looked like an executioner who had just scrubbed in. "Steves," Mendez said, his voice a gravelly baritone. "I expected a heavily armed entourage, not you and an auditor." "This is Penelope Woods," Larkin said softly. His voice didn't echo in the large room. It absorbed the sound around it. "She is the director of finance for the Steves Syndicate. She is the architect of the new routing system. You wanted to see the person pushing the buttons. Here she is." Mendez laughed. It was a dry, scraping sound. Arthur Langdon was a rat, but he understood the ecosystem. He knew how to show respect. "This girl sends me a digital ping demanding a $12 million release on a secondary node. I don't release cartel funds to strangers, especially strangers wearing lipstick." The two men flanking Mendez smirked. Penelope didn't blink. She reached into her leather briefcase, pulled out a single thin manila folder, and slid it across the polished marble. It stopped precisely an inch from Mendez's clasped hands. "Open it," Penelope said. Mendez stopped smiling. He glanced at Larkin, who remained perfectly still, watching the exchange with a dark, terrifying sort of pride. Mendez flipped the folder open. "I don't demand respect, Mr. Mendez," Penelope began, her voice calm, echoing slightly against the glass walls. "I demand efficiency. When Arthur Langdon ran this route, the operational loss due to your handling fees was approximately 4% per quarter. You claimed it was necessary to bribe the port authorities in Belize City." Mendez stared at the single sheet of paper inside the folder. His face remained carefully blank, but a small muscle in his jaw ticked. "I cross-referenced the port authority schedules with the holding company's wire transfers," Penelope continued, leaning back in her chair. "You aren't bribing anyone. The digital signature on the receiving end of those 4% diversions belongs to a shell corporation registered in Panama. A corporation wholly owned by your brother-in-law." The room went dead silent. The hum of the aggressive air conditioning suddenly sounded deafening. The two guards shifted their weight, their hands drifting closer to their waistbands. Larkin didn't move an inch, but his eyes tracked the guards. He was ready to kill them both before they cleared their holsters. Mendez looked up from the paper. The amusement was entirely gone. He looked at Penelope as if she had just materialized a live grenade on the table. "You are skimming from your own cartel bosses, Javier," Penelope said, dropping the honorific. Her tone was conversational, which made the threat infinitely worse. $12 million of my syndicate's money is currently sitting in a holding account. If you do not authorize the release codes in the next 3 minutes, I will hit a button on my phone. That button will forward this exact financial breakdown to the cartel's primary auditor in Sinaloa. I imagine they are far less forgiving of a 4% handling fee than Larkin is." Mendez stared at her. He looked at the hard, uncompromising line of her mouth, the utter lack of fear in her dark eyes. He was a man who trafficked in terror, and he realized with a sickening jolt that the woman sitting across from him was entirely immune to it. She wasn't holding a gun, she was holding a spreadsheet, and it was going to get him flayed alive. "You're bluffing," Mendez rasped. Penelope picked up her phone from the table. She unlocked the screen. She didn't hesitate. Her thumb hovered over the send icon. 2 minutes, she said. Mendez looked at Larkin. "You're letting her do this? She's going to start a war." "She's doing the math, Javier," Larkin replied, his voice a low, lethal hum. "I suggest you pay attention. She carries the one with extreme prejudice." Mendez looked back at the phone. He looked at the cold, clinical certainty in Penelope's eyes. He swallowed hard. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a heavily encrypted satellite phone, and typed in a sequence of numbers. He placed the device on the table. A small green light blinked twice. "The hold is released," Mendez said, his voice thick with suppressed rage. "The funds are routing to Belize." Penelope looked at her own screen. She refreshed the mainframe application she had built. The $12 million vanished from the Purgatory account and safely deposited into the Steve Syndicate's primary offshore node. "Pleasure doing business with you, Javier," Penelope said. She stood up, smoothing the front of her white suit, and picked up the manila folder. She didn't leave it behind. "I will be sending a revised schedule for the Q4 transfers. I expect them to be processed without delay and without the 4% tax." Larkin stood up. He didn't say a word to Mendez. He simply placed a hand on the small of Penelope's back and guided her out of the freezing glass room, leaving the cartel enforcer sweating in the air conditioning. Part 9. The ledger closes. The adrenaline crash hit Penelope the moment the heavy oak door of their hotel suite clicked shut. It was a sprawling, opulent penthouse overlooking the ocean, bathed in the warm golden light of the late afternoon sun. But Penelope didn't notice the view. Her knees suddenly felt like they were made of water. She dropped her briefcase onto a glass coffee table and leaned heavily against the back of a plush sofa, pressing the heels of her hands into her eyes. Her heart was beating so fast it physically hurt. She had just extorted a cartel boss. She had looked a murderer in the eye and threatened his life with a data transfer. "Drink," Larkin said. She opened her eyes. He was standing in front of her, holding out a glass of neat bourbon. He had already discarded his suit jacket and tie. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing the dark ink of syndicate tattoos winding up his forearms. Penelope took the glass. Her hand was shaking so badly, the amber liquid sloshed against the rim. She downed it in one burning swallow, gasping as the alcohol hit the back of her throat. Larkin took the empty glass from her rigid fingers and set it on the table. He didn't step back. He stayed exactly where he was, invading her space, his physical presence heavy and grounding. "You were shaking in the elevator," Larkin said, his voice rough. "I'm terrified," Penelope admitted, the truth tearing out of her. "I'm terrified almost every second of the day. I was terrified in the cubicle. I was terrified at the gala. I was terrified in that glass room." "You didn't look it." "That's the job," she whispered, looking up at him. "You taught me that. The men in this world only respect the armor. You don't let them see the blood." Larkin stared down at her. The afternoon sun caught the dark, exhausted circles under her eyes, the sharp line of her jaw, the fierce, unyielding intelligence that refused to break. He realized he had never seen anything more magnificent in his entire life. He reached out and gently pulled the severe knot from her hair. The dark strands fell around her shoulders, framing her face. She didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch, a microscopic surrender that sent a shockwave of heat straight to his chest. "I spent 3 years walking past your desk," Larkin murmured, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. 3 years looking right through you. It's the biggest failure of my life." "You were looking at the furniture," Penelope said softly. "I was blind," he corrected. He didn't ask for permission, and she didn't require him to. Larkin closed the final inch between them, his mouth coming down on hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was in collision. It was 3 years of suppressed tension, the residual adrenaline of surviving a cartel sit-down, and the violent, consuming realization that they were exact mirrors of each other. Penelope grabbed the front of his shirt, pulling him closer, matching his desperate intensity. She tasted like bourbon and danger. He tasted like power. Larkin backed her into the edge of the sofa, his hands finding the curve of her waist, anchoring her to him. They were a collision of ledgers and bullets, of calculated risks and brutal consequences. When they finally broke apart, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting the penthouse in deep, bruised shadows of purple and gold. Penelope kept her hands fisted in his shirt, her forehead resting against his chest, listening to the heavy, erratic thud of his heart. "Thomas is going to make a move," she said quietly, the reality of their world bleeding back into the room. "I know," Larkin said, resting his chin on the top of her head. "He's bleeding money, Larkin. He's desperate. Desperate men get sloppy. He'll try to bypass the new protocols, and when he can't, he'll come for me." "He won't get within 10 miles of you," Larkin promised, his voice hardening into absolute certainty. "If Thomas steps out of line, I won't reassign him. I'll bury him." Penelope pulled back slightly, looking up into the cold, pale eyes of the dawn. "No," she said. Larkin frowned. "No? Don't bury him," Penelope said, a slow, terrifying smile curving her lips. "Audit him, publicly, strip his assets, freeze his accounts, and force him to explain every stolen dime to the commission. Let him survive, but make him irrelevant. Death makes a martyr. Poverty makes a joke." Larkin stared at her. A low, dark laugh rumbled in his chest. It was a sound of pure, unfiltered reverence. He had built a fortress of violence, and she had just shown him how to weaponize the architecture. "You," Larkin whispered, leaning down to press a hard kiss to her jaw, "are going to be the absolute ruin of this syndicate." "I am going to double your profit margins," Penelope corrected, her hand sliding up to frame his face. "And I'm going to look devastating doing it." 2 days later, Penelope Woods walked onto the 42nd floor. The entire bullpen fell silent, watching her stride toward the executive suites. She didn't wear gray. She didn't look at the floor. She walked into the corner office, the glass door clicking shut behind her, sealing her into the empire she now co-ruled. The invisible secretary was dead. Long live the director. Did Penelope's ultimate power move in Miami leave you speechless? From an invisible secretary to the undisputed queen of the Steve Syndicate, her transformation is a masterclass in survival and strategy. If you loved watching Penelope use her brilliant mind to outmaneuver cartel bosses and claim her place beside Larkin, smash that like button. Share this story with your friends who love dark, high-stakes romance, and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next thrilling drama. Drop a comment below. What was your favorite Penelope moment? See you in the next video.